Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Farmaki. I am an assistant professor in tourism management at the Cyprus University of Technology. And it is with great pleasure that I have accepted the invitation of your professor to deliver this lecture. The title of my presentation is Tourist and Host Encounters in Post-Conflict Destinations. This is a topic that is very dear to me because of the context of Cyprus where I live. Many of you may know Cyprus as the perfect sea and sun destination and may not know the history of the island, but Cyprus is to this day divided. Since 1974, its capital is the only divided remaining European city. And of course, this conflict situation that the island has been facing for the last decades has created a very interesting environment to study travel motives and travel experiences. The picture that you see on your screen is actually taken from Cyprus. It's the barbed wire, which shows the division of the island. There is actually a physical division that is keeping the two communities of the island, the two main communities, the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, into, let's say, separate areas. Of course, you may say that Cyprus is a very specific case, so why should this context be studied? Why travel motives in this context or travel experiences be studied, and why is this worth it? What we do see, and as you can see from this screen, is that in the recent years, and I would say probably the last 2 decades, we see several changes happening in the global tourism industry. Of course, there are technological advances that have changed the way we travel, the way we experience tourism. There are social trends that lead to the development of new tourism forms. We see environmental changes, the climate change, of course, and the implications of this. Economic fluctuations, such as economic crisis that are impacting demand. But there is one thing that seems to be becoming more intense and it's increasing, and this is political instability. I would say political and social instability. So in the last 20 years or so, we see various negative events and crises happening throughout the world, in various destinations, such as terrorist attacks, social and political unrest. So what we do see is that greater and greater political instability is impacting global tourism. Not just demand, but also the way we operate things in tourism. So in my view, the topic of travel motives or demotives and the topic of travel and tourist experiences within this context of greater political instability and so on is worthy of investigation. So it is not just about focusing on a specific destination such as Cyprus and try to understand whether people of this destination would visit each other if they have been to a conflict. It is more than that. Findings from studies like the ones that I will present to you today can inform our understanding of how the world works in the midst of various crises and political instability, and how travel should perhaps be adjusted, or in other words, what the role of travel and tourism is in dealing with this political instability or even bridging any differences that communities may have between them. Now, of course, you do know the United Nations 2030 agenda. I am sure that you have discussed about this in your modules. The agenda basically sets several sustainable development goals. And there are a lot of these goals that the World Tourism Organization has expressed commitment to. For example, tourism is supposed to contribute to poverty alleviation and poverty reduction and so on. One of those goals that are outlined in the Agenda 2030 of the UN is peace. So The World Tourism Organization may not have committed itself to delivering peace through tourism, but it's widely recognized that tourism as a social phenomenon may bring a lot of benefits that can ultimately contribute to peace building. So tourism is regarded as a driver of change. It can contribute to sustainable development, economic growth, particularly in regions, and it can foster regional cooperation between regions and even countries. It may contribute to technological innovation, cultural heritage preservation, but also promote women empowerment and inclusivity within the society. So there are various benefits that tourism can bring to destinations. And through all of these benefits, tourism has acquired the label of being a peace broker. Like I said, tourism is a social phenomenon. We tend to speak of tourism in economic terms, regarding it as an industry. Yes, it is an industry and an important, let's say, element of the economy. But at the same time, it's a social phenomenon. It's a social activity that we undertake. And because of the contact that it encourages between the tourist or the visitor and the local community, it is said that it can actually cultivate greater understanding among people, that it can lead to improved perception, attitudes, and relations among people. So in essence, because we travel and we come into contact with the local community, we understand each other better. So this tenet, which relies on the travel-induced contact, is suggesting that because of this greater understanding, tourism may actually contribute to global peace. It can help to harmonize relationships between not just people, but also nations. And the pioneer who actually gave a very interesting, insightful speech back in 1988 regarding the so-called peace through tourism tenet was Luis D'Amore. And back then in this conference, he invited researchers to consider the role of tourism in peace building. And ever since, there has been a lot of research conducted on the role of tourism as a peace broker, as an agent of peace. Now, of course, you understand that this plethora of studies is huge. We're talking about hundreds of studies. I could not possibly go over every single one of them. But what I can tell you is how this research evolved, this research on the peace through tourism tenet. Initially, in the early 1990s, we had conceptual studies and also studies looking at the perceptions of visitors when they travel to a hostile community. What these studies tell us is that there might be some positive influence of the travel in terms of the perceptions that people had before traveling, and then comparing the pre-travel perceptions to the post-travel perceptions. Now, in essence, though, when we look at subsequent studies that draw from various cases from North and South Korea, from the Middle East, Greece and Turkey, and so on, what we see is that findings tend to be inconclusive. In other words, some studies report positive findings, that people's perceptions, visitors' perceptions improve after they visit a hostile community. Others claim that this is not the case. An interesting argument by Anastasopoulos, who examined Greek visitors' perceptions when they traveled to Turkey, was that travel cannot necessarily improve the perceptions that we have of a traditional enemy, cannot necessarily improve understanding between traditional enemies. And he actually identified the role of tour guides as influential in this perceptual change, or rather not. change, but the constant of perception being negative. Other studies have also identified various obstacles to the role of tourism as a peace broker, saying that tourism can't really change people's perceptions and attitudes, because at the end of the day, there are other factors that come into play. For instance, there are economic and political elements. At the end of the day, tourism is used by policymakers as a tool for promoting their own personal interests and specific agendas. And of course, tourism is an industry, which means that people will compete over resources. So because of these aspects, studies have said that there's far more to tourism basically than just one group visiting another, and then because of this visit, the perceptions and relationships will be improved. And there are also other issues at the socio-political level that studies have identified. In many cases, nationalistic sentiments were still prevalent, preventing the visitors from actually having a positive experience of the visit. There are issues such as political tensions between the nations, between the hostile communities, that may actually negatively impact the experience, tourist experience and perceptions. There's mistrust. Even trade issues were recognized as negatively influencing this potential role that travel may play in terms of harmonizing relations between divided communities and bringing peace between them. So the main, let's say, argument that was put forward by Litvin was that tourism is actually a beneficiary of peace, not a cause of peace. Usually we don't see in the midst of conflict or war tourism flourishing. So war and conflict needs to end for tourism to pick up, to be developed in a destination. So this is the argument on which this tenet build on, that tourism benefits from peace, but it doesn't really cause peace. Now, the issue is that there are certain gaps in the literature. If we look at the literature, the studies that have been devoted on studying people's perceptions and motives for traveling in a hostile community, we see certain gaps. The first is that they all rely on the contact theory in their investigation, which is very simple. It basically suggests that you visit a destination that your country had some kind of a conflict with. So, because you come into contact with people from the local community, then that means that your perceptions will improve. So it's very simplistic theory, but like I already mentioned, there are other factors that come into play that will influence contact, the degree of contact, the way that perceptions and attitudes of people are shaped. And this contact hypothesis, in essence, overlooks the context in which the contact happens and the nature of the contact. And I will come back to this later on. But in essence, what needs to be remembered is that much of the traveling that happens is still done in an organized nature. So Anastasopoulos studies, for instance, looked at a group of Greek travelers traveling to Turkey back in 1992. But those visitors went on a package tour. They had a tour guide with them who was Greek. So, of course, the narrative of the tour guide, the nature of this organized trip, which basically meant that they were traveling in a group, they stayed in a hotel in a group, they used to travel on a coach, on a bus. All of this means that they had very minimal contact with the local population. The other gap that we recognize in the literature is that a lot of these studies are focusing on student groups that visit a hostile destination or a hostile community for a short period of time, maybe 2 weeks, as part of an educational trip. So of course, because there is a common agenda, common interests, common goals, when students visit other students within a so-called post-conflict situation, then the perceptions are more likely going to improve. But how representative is that of real tourism, of a tourist situation? So because there were these gaps in the literature, I decided that I wanted to look at the motives, or rather the intentions, the reasons why people in Cyprus, Greek Cypriots, for instance, would travel to visit their counterparts, Turkish Cypriots, and vice versa. And I wanted to go more in depth and understand the way their travel experiences are formed or shaped. And it was my personal interest to focus on the nature of the encounter of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots in order to understand a little bit more rather than just this travel-induced contact. You know, I wanted to see what was the context and the nature of this contact, and what were the factors influencing this travel-induced contact. And like I said before in the beginning of this presentation, maybe Cyprus is a very specific case, but there are so many things that we could learn from all these different cases of post-conflict destinations, or even destinations where there is ongoing conflict, because of the increase in political instability worldwide. So there are so many things that we can actually understand from such cases about travel behavior in general situations of political instability, vulnerability. So before I go into the details of these studies and the findings, I think it's important for me to give you some information regarding the case under study. Some of you may know, some of you may not, as to where Cyprus is. You can see on the map on your screen, Cyprus is the eastern part of Europe. It is a member of the European Union. It is an island in the Mediterranean Sea below Turkey and on the west of Lebanon and Syria and Israel. And it is known as a sea and sand destination ever since the 1960s, when the Republic of Cyprus was established. Before that, we were a protectorate of the British Empire. Tourism has been invested on, it has been selected as a sector where investment should be located because of this mass tourism boom that happened in the Mediterranean in the 60s and the 70s. So it has become known as a popular sea and sand destination. Now, of course, many people know of the political situation in Cyprus. Some of you may not know the details. In essence, the Republic of Cyprus was established in 1960. And when Cyprus was granted independence by the British. And on Cyprus at the time, there were various communities that were living. There were the Greek Cypriots. The Greek Cypriots were the largest community, the Turkish Cypriots. We also had Maronites and Armenians and Latins. So there were various communities living on the island. Now, the whole issue erupted in 1963 when basically intercommunal tensions erupted between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. Those were the two main communities of the island. They could not see eye to eye. Even in the parliament, there were disagreements and so on. I will not go into the details as to why these tensions erupted. It has to do with ethnic aspects and each community wanting rather to maintain an affiliation to the motherland, which is Greece and Turkey. In 1964, in an aim to establish ceasefire, the Green Line was drawn, cutting the island into two horizontally. The Green Line, in essence, is a buffer zone. And unfortunately, things couldn't improve. In 1974, war erupted when Turkish forces invaded and occupied the northern part of the island. 185,000 Greek Cypriots were displaced. They were forced basically out of their houses and had had to relocate in the southern part of the island, and 45,000 Turkish Cypriots living in the southern part of the island relocated to the northern part. Nicosia is the capital of the island. It is in the middle of the island, and it is, even to this day, the only remaining divided capital in Europe. So to this day, we have the northern part being occupied by Turkish Cypriots. Of course, this part is not recognized internationally as a separate community or as a separate state, only by Turkey. And the Republic of Cyprus, which is the internationally recognized government in Cyprus, is located in the southern part. I will use the terms northern and southern purely geographically from now on when I refer to the research conducted, and not in political terms. So from 1974 until 2003, there was absolutely no traveling between each sites. There was no communication between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. One wasn't able to visit the other, one couldn't walk in the other sites. And it was in 2003 where crossing basically was made possible for the first time after many, many years. And of course, there was enthusiasm by both communities to visit their old homes, their old villages and towns, and to see basically out of curiosity what was on the other side. By 2014, more than 13 million crossings were registered for Turkish Cypriots, and 8 million crossings by Greek Cypriots. So we see that the number of Greek Cypriots willing to visit was less. And we might understand why later on when I explain the findings of my studies. There were interesting studies that were conducted to understand what were the initial motives of Greek Cypriots crossing over. These were because of interest to look for ancestral land, for gambling, because in the Republic of Cyprus, at the time at least, there were no casinos. Now we do have casinos, but at the time there were no casinos, whereas in the northern part of the island, there were casinos. So a lot of Greek Cypriots were drawn by these to visit. And of course, a lot of them visited for curiosity or to visit some sacred places like churches and monasteries. The studies looking into the Turkish Cypriots motives for crossing identified two key motives. Turkish Cypriots seem to visit the southern part of the island for shopping and for employment. For shopping, even though this may sound odd, it's not so odd to understand because we're talking about a not recognized government. So for years they had to face embargo, they have to import products from Turkey. This might raise the cost of products, but also you can't really find branded products that easily. So it's much easier for them to just cross over and buy what they want in the southern part of Cyprus. So there are two studies that I will explain now. First, the first study, which I conducted with colleagues. The aim of it was to look at the reasons, the motives, basically, and the demotives of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots visiting the other side. So we wanted to examine the reasons motivating, but also inhibiting visitation. And in order to do this, we wanted basically to understand more the conditions that influence travel decision-making in complex situations, in complex contexts, such as the one in Cyprus. So there are two types of research methods that we used. On the first stage, at the first stage, we used qualitative research. We did interviews with Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, trying to understand why they would visit or not visit the other side. And based on the findings, we developed a questionnaire and did a survey in order to test basically the motives and demotives of both communities. The data was analyzed thematically, the qualitative data, and the quantitative data were analyzed using social network analysis. And these are the main findings, basically. On the one hand, we have the travel motives for both communities, and on the other, we have the travel motives. So let's look first at what motivates people to cross over and to visit the other side. The Greek Cypriots, we found, were mostly motivated to visit Northern Cyprus by push factors. Of course, I'm sure you are aware of push and pull theory of motivation. So push factors are those factors that are internal, that predispose you to travel. Pull factors are those factors that are present in the destination that make you select a specific destination, basically, because they satisfy your internal motives. So for Greek Cypriots, visitation was mostly motivated by push factors, mainly nostalgia. So many people wanted to visit their ancestral lands, their villages, the places, the houses, basically, the homes, the places where they were born and grew up with, even if they didn't really remember those. Maybe they were babies or very young when they had to live in 1974, but those were the main reasons they wanted to visit their houses, their places where they grew up in. Curiosity was a main motivator for many Greek Cypriots, particularly the younger generations who have never seen their parents' villages, their parents' houses, and they just wanted to see where did their family come from and where did their family grow up in. Cultural and religious attractions were also another factor that was predisposing people to visit the northern part of the Cyprus. This is, of course, a pull factor that was attracting the Greek Cypriots. Monasteries mostly were a key attraction. Churches were a key attraction for many Greek Cypriots. And like I said before, gambling, because gambling was not allowed in the southern part of Cyprus, but there were casinos in the northern part. So these were the two pull factors that attracted Greek Cypriots to the northern side. So nostalgia and curiosity was the prevalent push factors for most of the people we included in our research, and cultural, religious attractions, gambling were the main pull factors attracting Greek Cypriots. Now, for Turkish Cypriots, the situation was slightly different because the main reasons that motivated them to travel to southern Cyprus were pull factors, so attractions, facilities that existed in the other side. These include shopping, malls, entertainment in the form of dining and restaurants and bars and all sorts of other things that they could do as part of entertainment. In order for you to understand a little bit better why the Turkish Cypriots would be attracted by these factors present in southern Cyprus, the southern part of Cyprus is slightly more developed than the northern part. So because of these reasons, there are branded products that can be found easily. There are more shopping and entertainment facilities present. So because of these reasons, Turkish Cypriots, especially the younger generations, were attracted to the southern part mostly for these reasons, for these pull factors. Now let's have a look at the travel demotives, the reasons inhibiting Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots from visiting each other. Many Greek Cypriots that we talked to and basically expressed unwillingness to visit the northern part because of fear of legitimization of the Turkish Cypriot administration. Like I said, the Turkish Cypriot community, the government, is not recognized by any other country in the world except Turkey. So a lot of Greek Cypriots felt that if they cross over, they have to show a passport or their identity card to cross over, it would be equal to acknowledging that there is a formal government, a formal Turkish Cypriot government, and they didn't want that. So that was one of the reasons why they said we will not visit. And for many others, unwillingness to visit arose because of an ethical dilemma to show passport and to spend money in the northern parts of the island. So for many people that we talked to, it was an issue of morality, really saying, I was forced by the Turkish forces out of my house. There are people that are missing, there are people that have died in the war. Why would I go back and give money to the enemy, basically? And interestingly, we didn't find any demoted for the Turkish Cypriot community interviewed. They couldn't really find a reason predisposing them to travel to the southern sides. So our main conclusion was that the Greek Cypriots' active offensive attitudes reinforced the passive offensive attitudes of Turkish Cypriots. What I mean by this, there were no demotives, specific demotives expressed by the Turkish Cypriot community. However, some of them, not a lot, but some of them stated that in the last years, we have been seeing some insults by members of the Greek Cypriot community. They look at the numbers of our cars and they realize we come from the northern part of the island and they tell us to leave, or they are very hostile to us. Some of them even reported damage to their cars by unknown people. Maybe they went out for dinner or they went out to the beach and they came back and they saw their car was destroyed. So this active offensive attitude by some members of the Greek Cypriot community seems to make the Turkish Cypriots a little bit more defensive, and them expressing willingness to visit or even necessity to visit, to buy things and so on, but at the same time expressing more caution as to how they visit. For instance, many people said, well, we will not visit individually with my husband, let's say, but we would like to go as part of a bigger group for greater security. Now, the second study, the second research that I will now explain, looks into the travel behavior and experiences of the Greek Cypriot community. So the first one looked at both sides, both communities, but this one will look more into the way the travel experience of the Greek Cypriot community is shaped. And mostly it will look at the nature of the encounter between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots by hearing the voices of the Greek Cypriot community. So the aim was to look at the travel intentions and the actual travel of Greek Cypriots. So why they would visit or not visit. For those who visited, why did they visit? And of course, the factors that influence these perceptions and attitudes and behavior. In doing so, the main aim of this study that I conducted with a colleague was to gain insight on the conditions in which travel-induced contact may, in fact, contribute to peace. This study was conducted using pure qualitative methods. So we interviewed Greek Cypriots that lived on the southern part of the island. We included a variety of participants. You can see their ages ranged from 19 to 87. So we got younger generations and we got generations that used to live in the northern part also. Both males and females were interviewed. And then when we reached data saturation of 77 interviews, we basically stopped the data collection and analyzed the data using thematic analysis. So what are the main findings? In essence, what we found is that there are 4 types of visitors, or at least we could categorize the visitors into 4 distinct types. The first we labeled intentional visitors. Those are the visitors who expressed positive intentions about visiting the northern part of the island. And because of these positive intentions, they planned their visits ahead, and they knew basically what they were going to visit, where they were going to go, and so on. The second type is, as we labeled them, coincidental visitors. This group refers to visitors who didn't really plan, they didn't have the intentions to visit the other side, but they ended up doing so. Example I can give you: someone was hosting relatives from abroad, let's say from the UK, and they were working in the central part of Nicosia, and their relatives said, oh, why don't we cross over? Let's see the northern part of Nicosia also. They had their ID cards with them, so they just crossed over, even though there was no initial intention to do so. The third group of non-visitors, basically, of participants of interviewees, we labeled intentional non-visitors. Those were the people that said, we are not willing to visit the northern part of Cyprus, or if they had visited in the past, they said, we are not willing to revisit. So these are the intentional non-visitors. And then a fourth group of interviews was labeled coincidental non-visitors. These are people who have not been able to visit the northern part of Cyprus yet, but they would like to. There are various reasons why they gave us justifications as to why they haven't visited yet, or why the circumstances didn't allow them to do so. Many people said, well, I don't have a car, so how can I drive in the northern part? I can't. Some people said that they would like to visit, but because of their job, maybe they're in the police force or in the army, so circumstances are not ideal because of their occupation. Now, these are the four types of visitors or non-visitors that we identified. But having looked at the encounter, the experience, another way, the exchange between the visitors, the Greek Cypriot visitors and the Turkish Cypriot community hosting them, we found that the visit is influenced, the encounter is influenced by two factors. The first is the structure of the visit, which includes frequency of visit, how often they visit, intentionality, and the exchange of benefits. And the second aspect that is influential is the nature of the contact. In other words, whether there was a high degree of interaction or there was just passive contact, passive exchange, and then the type of exchange between the two parties. And I will explain a bit what I mean by the type of exchange. Overall, based on these factors, we identified 5 types of tourist host encounters that may take place in a post-conflict context. So starting from the left-hand side, we have those that visited the northern part intentionally. The visit was planned and there was reciprocity of benefits. They thought that they gained out of this visit, and the visit tends to be frequent. So there are Greek Cypriots that visit the northern part regularly, maybe every weekend or every other weekend or once a month. They get to meet their old neighbors and their old Turkish Cypriot friends. So there is a high degree of interaction with the Turkish Cypriot community. And it's not just about commercial exchanges. There is actual closeness of interaction, active interaction, a friendly, let's say, atmosphere with members of the Turkish Cypriot community. And it's not just about buying products, let's say, and so on. We also have another form of intentional visit that is frequent, planned, but there is no reciprocity of benefits. So there is a group of Greek Cypriots that will visit the northern part regularly, frequently, but it's mostly for commercial exchanges, for instance, to gamble, to buy things. But there is minimal interaction between the tourists and the host community. So intentional visit may occur on 2 levels. It can be frequent, planned, and reciprocal for both communities because of closeness of contact, active contact, or it may not be reciprocal for both because it's done mostly for commercial purposes. In the middle of this continuum, you can see that there is another form of intentional visit that is not frequent, it is occasional. It is planned, but it is not reciprocal. So again, in this type of visit, which is done sporadically, We see that there are minimal commercial exchanges and minimal personal interaction. So people may visit because they want to see a monastery, as part of a group visit, to visit a church. They don't want to buy anything. They say that we bring our own food and our own water. We just visit purely for the religious aspect of it. And because of the nature of the visit, there is minimal contact with members of the local community. And then on the right-hand side, you see two types of tourist host encounter. One is the unintentional visit. In other words, there are people in the cohort, in the group of interviewees that we spoke to, that said that, well, we don't really visit frequently. Maybe we just visited once. It wasn't planned. But yeah, we liked it. There is some potential reciprocity of benefits. So it's the example of people I gave you who might have been hosting relatives. Their relatives expressed willingness to see the other side, and then they just said, okay, let's go. And there was moderate, rather spontaneous interaction because the visit wasn't planned. And some of these people said, yeah, we bought something while we were there. So there was mostly a commercial-based type of exchange. And then on the very right-hand side of the continuum, you can see the non-visitors, the intentional non-visit tourist host encounter, where there is absolutely no visit, there is no intention of recipients visiting, there is no physical, no verbal contact or communication with the other side because they do not want to. For various reasons that I mentioned already, they do not think it's moral, it is the enemy, they have taken half of the island, why would we visit and give them money, and so on. So in a complex setting, like in a post-conflict situation, you can see that visitation is complex. Visitation is not just about, okay, we go there, there is contact, because we visited and, everyone is happy. It's far more complicated than that. There are a lot of factors that play a role in shaping the perceptions, the attitudes, and the final behavior of visitors in a context where there was conflict, there is conflict, or there is political instability. And Schoenmez and Greffe suggested that continuous political turmoil has a permanent effect on people's perceptions and attitudes. And this seems to be the case in Cyprus for not everyone, of course, but for a large percentage of the population. So the socio-political environment in which the visit takes place influences the nature of the encounter, the perceptions and the attitudes of people, and by extent, the degree and nature of contact. What we also found out through this study is that visitation doesn't necessarily translate into a close interaction because we visit the hostile community. That doesn't mean that we actually communicate and interact with them to such a degree that our perceptions and attitudes will change. And of course, in this context, we need to acknowledge the influence of travel motives, the intentions, whether there are intentions to visit the other side or not, the frequency and the structure of the visits, because this influences the nature of the contact and the mutuality of the benefits derived by both communities. So what are the implications of all of this, and what can this teach you? What can this tell you that I'm hoping you would take as insights, and perhaps when you study other type of, let's say, visitations in the middle of crisis or in other contexts, you may find helpful to understand travel motives and experiences more. The first thing that we need to realize is that there are various examinations of tourist-host relationships within unstable settings, within settings where there's fragility, there's political vulnerability, social unrest, and so on. It's not just about post-conflict destinations. We see political instability in other types of destinations also. And this is rising from what we see from statistics. So studies such as the ones that I presented can actually inform policymakers and industry practitioners of the sensitivity of travel. of how tourist encounters develop and how they evolve and what they actually can bring to tourism. So in this context, policymakers of destinations where there has been conflict or there is conflict ongoing, they can take the findings of such studies like the ones that I presented, and they can try to see how they can formulate policies that will encourage visitation if the goal is to build peace between the two communities. If the literature is going to be enriched, the literature on the role of tourism in peace building, then what we need to see is a shift of academic focus from evaluations of perceptions and attitudes pre-visit and post-visit to examinations of the reasons motivating or demotivating people to visit hostile nations. So we shouldn't just focus on perceptions before and after a visit, but what we should look at is the travel intentions of people, because there are people that do not want to visit, so we also need to hear their voice. We also need to consider the conditions and the factors that shape the socio-political environment in which the tourist host encounter takes place. So, like I said, it's not just about people visiting and the type of contact they have, it's about other factors that come into play at the economic level, the social level, the political level. So if there is still hostility or hostility increases for a specific time period between the two communities, this may negatively impact travel intentions. And of course, future research needs to examine different types of encounters within post-conflict destinations. So what we need to look at is not just look at the tourist as a general term. There are all sorts of tourists. There are all sorts of encounters that may take place. Service encounters, for instance, occurring in commercial settings, or social encounters occurring in non-commercial settings. So in order to understand nature and the implications, the outcomes of encounters, we need to basically look at this type of encounters in post-conflict settings within specific contexts. I would like to thank you at this point for your attention. What I can do is give to your professor the two studies that I have explained so that you can actually read more into this if you're interested, and every reference that I have used in these slides you can find in these two journal articles. So thank you very much and have a nice day.